Hello. Today on the 20th of April, the ban list to be implemented on the 27th, a week from today, was announced. I want to take a few minutes here. I'm going to walk through the cards. I'm going to not only talk about, what the cards are, but what it means. What it means to the metagame, how the decks that we're probably seeing are going to change, if it is a slight hit to the deck and it is, maybe less consistent, or if it's a deck I'm predicting that we just won't see anymore because of it. So with that, we'll jump in. First, we're going to look at Limited 1, Nightmare Mermaid. This one was a little bit surprising to me because you don't see it used a ton. Before, I believe it was Limited 2, which is kind of the least utilized Limited, and there aren't too many cards there, so often you can put 2 of whatever that card is in your deck and not have it impacted where it's competing against a lot of other Limited 2 cards, because again, there aren't that many. But Limited 1 is really tough. You obviously can only have one of those in your deck, and you need to pick the right one. So I don't imagine many players are going to be prioritizing Nightmare Mermaid over that. So in the big picture, you're probably not going to see it anymore. Now, one thing is it can special summon another Nightmare monster, aka Ibli. So they work well together, but Ibli, not to spoil too much, but is also now on this list. So if you're looking to play a deck to get to that effect, and Ibli can be very powerful. If you've watched my videos, it can lock people out of playing the game at times. If you are going for that kind of attack, if that theme, you're going to be going all in. You're not going to be able to use that as kind of like a side effect to your deck. That is going to be the core of what you're trying to do. So again, I don't imagine we're going to see this very much. Now we'll look at the Ravenous Cocoa Dragon next. Very, very powerful card. It was used in a number of decks for a bit, even like Mech Knights before. In the original kind of version that we saw when Mech Knights first came out with a little bit of synchro summoning in. Now it is used mainly in synchro decks, like the Synchron specifically. The quick effect is you can discard 2 cards and destroy a card on your opponent's side of the field, and that includes on their turn. So can really, really disrupt what your opponent's looking to do. Moving it to Limited 1 is painful, but even further with the card below with Tatsunoko, because this is another card that is going in that same Synchron deck. It is a card that is a tuner synchro, which some of these cards are requiring to have. So what they're essentially saying with this, both of these now being limited to 1, is that you pick one or the other to include. If you need a tuner synchro, you're going to go with Tatsunoko, but you're also losing a really powerful card by not having the Ravenous Cocoa Dragon in the deck. So already having to prioritize. Another kind of spoiler here, the Synchron deck takes a major hit with some of the items down below on this deck, with this list here. So with these 2 changes alone, with the cards I just mentioned, I don't think if it was just those that we would see like a ton of difference in the use of the Synchron deck, but it is probably kind of a final nail in the casket with a lot of the stuff we're seeing below. Now, one that a little torn about, only because the Salamangreat deck has been, with the Code Talker Alive effect, has been out for so long. It is something that's played consistently. It is not the most powerful deck, I'll argue, but it is very, very consistent. I put a video out just a few days ago about how the #1 player from the KC Cup had used it. Yeah, we had seen it for a bit without major changes, and this is the first hit to that. This is one of the offensive cards in it. You tribute 1 card, assign that type monster, and then destroy a card in the field. It can be a monster, a spell, or trap, whatever. And now limiting this to 1, there's 1 more card within the Limited 1 within that. So that is Gazelle specifically within that deck. So like we were talking about before, it is one or the other now. You're not going to have both, and you're already reducing the consistency of the deck or the power of the deck in doing that. So with this change alone, I don't think you would see a ton of change to the Salamangreat deck, but with everything else, you probably will. Transmodify is listed a bit in kind of the description here. It's more precautionary than everything. It may be for something that was just released or something upcoming, but I don't see a clear use right now. I haven't dug through every archetype, but I'm not going to spend more time than we need there. Moving on to 2 Limited 2. This one's really interesting. Scrap Iron Scarecrow was Limited 1 before and moving to 2. As I mentioned, 2 is usually pretty flexible because a lot of decks don't have any Limited 2 generally in them. Scrap Iron Scarecrow is basically a continuous trap card where you can just negate one attack from your opponent per turn. If you had two of these in the field, you could stop a lot of attacks, but the problem with having two on your field is they're occupying two spell or trap zones, and that leaves one playable left, so sometimes continuous cards in those zones are really hurtful because they just fill up space for you to use other things on. So maybe there's a creative way to use it, but I don't see it being too viable, on a really high metagame level. So we'll move on to Void Feast. Now, Void Feast is going to be a little bit of a nail in the coffin for Infernoid. We'll have to wait and see, but it takes a big hit. So Void Feast is a card that really makes the deck consistent. So moving this into Limited 2 is a big deal. But on top of that, Void Vanishment in the deck is already a Limited 2, so it's now competing against those. Big hit to another deck that's been around for quite a while. And again, I'm surprised to see it because I don't think it's overpowered the deck. It is very consistent and it's something you're going to see like a top cut in major tournaments for sure. But I don't think it was problematic. I think this is going to be a pretty big hit and not sure it'll be viable anymore. Unlike the next deck here, which Mech Knight Purple now moving to Limited 3. Last month, you may remember, Mech Knight's moving on to the ban list. It was Blue Sky, and it was World Legacy's Memory that moved into Limited 3. Now, the deck obviously was not as strong because those are good cards and moving to Limited 3, in addition to all of the other good spell cards and trap cards that are Limited 3. It's more trap cards. It really reduced the power of the deck. However, quite a few people can still get to King of Games using the deck, including myself. I was using it recently. Didn't get to King of Games, but still very, very consistent deck. It placed high in the KC Cup, and clearly they felt that they needed to put the nail in the coffin and just make Mech Knights basically unplayable now because, again, you have Blue Sky, you now have Purple Nightfall, which everyone was still playing 3 of, and you have World Legacy's Memory all in the Limited 3. This deck is not going to be playable. They are making a statement here, and it is a strong statement for sure. Now, in addition to like a pure Mech Knights deck, this is also hurting a lot of other decks because there's a handful of decks like Synchron, like Resonators that are playing some Mech Knight cards for just extra special summoning support, and a little bit of ways to kind of draw through the deck a little bit quicker at times too, like with Blue Sky, for example, and be able to draw like 1, 2, or even 3 cards right away and pull from the deck that way. So it'll be gone from there too. I think it's a fun way to incorporate into other decks, but just no more. It's not worth the Limited 3 tag when you can fit cards from your actual archetype in that are going to probably be limited in themselves. So we talked about the 2 Synchro monsters above that are going to be hurting the Synchron deck, and obviously Jet Synchron is also included in this list. Everyone has 3 of them in. It's part of the new skill that Yusei has that is making the deck really consistent, and that'll be no more. Plain and simple. So probably not going to see Synchrons, and for one more reason I'll talk about in a minute. DD Savant Kepler, I don't think this is really impactful at all. Like it basically mentioned in the description here, this card is going to move to Limited 3 in order to take the limit of Dark Contract with the Dark Gate off. So probably about a net 0. This card can be searched anyway, so I don't see that being a problem. Specifically, if you look at Declan's skill, you can search out that way. So moving on from that one, not too much to talk about. Nightmare Corruptor Ibli. Last KC Cup, I don't think it got a lot of play, but I do think it's really powerful. I was considering using it more because people weren't expecting it, and a lot of people take out a card like Link Disciple from their extra deck, which is often the only way to counter it. You can either do that, you can do a Tribute Summon, which not something we're doing often in this day and age of Yu-Gi-Oh! Or you can just kind of sacrifice it. You can turn it into attack position and, in battle phase, just get it destroyed and attack your opponent's weakest monster to lose the fewest life points. But sometimes that can still be 1500 plus, if not more. So I don't think it's been impactful right now, but I think it could easily cause problems. You guys have seen my videos on using Ibli. So probably the right move, as much as I hate to admit it. So we saw one hit already with Salomon Great of Cynet Crosswipe being added to a limited 1. Now Lady Debug. Now this is interesting because it goes from a limited 2 to limited 3. In theory that sounds better, but I think this is a bigger hit for it because the limited 3 cards that were already in the deck, specifically Solomon Great Circle, this is now competing against. So you're gonna have 3 total instead of 3 circles and then 2 ladybug or debugs. So a hit. The deck is not going to be as consistent. It'll probably still get some play, but not to the level of being the #1 deck in the KC Cup. Now last, tuning. I said it was a nail in the coffin for the Synchron deck, and this is really, really driving that home. That is the main use for tuning. The other one was within Resonators. Not quite as much, but it will take a hit there. I don't think Resonators will be as impacted, but I don't think they're top. Oh, well, they get a lot of usage right now, but I don't think they're like the #1 deck. So we'll see if that impacts. I think we get a little less usage of Resonators and probably no usage moving forward with Synchron specifically. Not going to spend a ton of time within removing from the list. I don't think they're going to be too impactful specifically. But the other thing that I want to cover just quickly is this is cards specifically, right? This is not skills. So what decks that we don't see really impacted here, we're not looking at Phantom Knights, we're not looking at Dark Magicians, and we're not looking at heroes, or Elemental Heroes specifically. I think those will probably get hit by skills because they are our decks that rely on that. So I think there's probably going to be a follow-up to this with skills specifically referenced, and I think those will all take a hit. Now, if there's any of those 3, again, Phantom Knights, Dark Magicians, or Elemental Heroes that do not take a hit, that's probably the new Tier 1 deck. Because if everything else gets a little weaker, but one strong deck doesn't, then there you go. That one's rising up in strength by default, really. And then a couple of others, if we just look through like the top 100 performers from the recent KC Cup, there's 2 that aren't really taking a hit here, but they're not overly used, but still can do well. One would be Madolche, pretty much untouched as far as I can tell. Again, I've had some frustrating moments against the deck, but I can't deny that it can be very, very strong if played correctly. And the other one being Sulfa Cord, I don't know the deck that well, so I don't want to speak out of turn. I know a good chunk of players in the top 100 were using the deck, and it is very consistent too. So my prediction on that is probably end of next month that we'll see a couple of those, or one or maybe more of those cards hit the ban list to control it a little bit. But I don't think it's kind of run so powerfully within the game that there's a need to do anything quite yet. And that is the ban list for April 2023. Let me know your thoughts below. Is there a card that was completely missed here? The only one that I think could have been on would have been Warning Point, which is seeing a ton of usage. Also, Bottomless Trap Hole. But I think the usage on those 2 are so high just because they are not on the ban list, and they are higher than cards on the ban list because they're not limited. Pretty simple logic there. But yeah, what do you think? Are there cards that were missed? Are there cards that should be removed from here, or a little surprise on anything like Mermaid and Ibly? And yeah, let me know if there's decks that you are going to be playing now, seeing in reaction to these things. So hope you enjoyed the video.